Hello, what is up? So, I'm going to be talking about just looking at hardware unbox because I really do rate them as a channel, and I tend to agree a lot with what they say. So I just thought we're going to watch it. So we got DLSS for upscaling. Tim, who is part of hardware unbox, is really good at reviewing technology and all that. So especially the upscaling techniques, he's really good at analysing it, and a lot of this stuff is what I've said. Uh, and we got FSR 4 as well. So we're going to watch both of them, and I'll just stop it when I've got something to say. So let's start it.
One of the most impressive things we found about DLSS 4 at 4K was how it preserved texture quality in motion and practically eliminated the TAA blur that's been plaguing games for ages. I'm happy to report that this benefit also applies to DLSS 4 at 1440p. TAA blur that's been plaguing.
Alright, so this is what I've said in the past, and it was definitely good, but I think a lot of people can overhype things too much, and then people get carried away with it, and then you get the ultras saying crystal clear it is and all that. So definitely it was better than FSR 3, but there was issues with it. There's even issues with DLSS 4, so that's far from perfect. But we'll get into that, uh, later on into the video. But for me, you can see there's clearly more blur on the DLSS 3 here than the DLSS 4.
Games for ages. I'm happy to report that this benefit also applies to DLSS 4 at 1440p. If you've been playing games at this resolution using native TAA, you'll notice that even the DLSS 4 performance mode produces less blur in motion, with a similar level of clarity regardless of whether you're stationary or in motion. Native TAA or DLSS 3 using DLAA in contrast both produce a blurrier image when you start moving relative to standing.
Yeah, but the thing is, people were telling me before that DLSS 3 was just as good as native, and it was maybe in the same in games like Cyberpunk. If there's a poor implementation of a native TAA, DLSS 3 could look better. But at the end of the day, I think it was Gamer Nexus who said that native should always look better than DLSS 3, and that's what I found to be the case in a lot of games at the time.
Still. This means that in most examples we saw, the DLSS 4 performance mode delivers higher texture quality than DLSS 3 quality. It depends on the game we're looking at as to whether it matches native rendering or.
So as you can see there, it's more blurry, so you can hardly see the detail, and that's even at quality DLSS 3. And this is what I was seeing a lot, and obviously the fanboys shut me down, tried to anyway. But I definitely, he was good, yeah, but I never overhype these technologies to the point of no return, like a lot of other people did. So it's not me trying to score points, it's just me trying to make people aware of the differences. So definitely DLSS 4 performance even is a lot better. Uh, it's definitely gonna depend on the game. Like, see, this is another thing. You can't just go into every game, especially at 1440p, because I've seen it for myself. There is going to be certain games where DLSS 4 performance will not look good to me, and I've seen that in Rebirth, as I've said, a few other games. Anyway, let's carry on.
Exceeds it, but generally the improvement is significant. Once again, this creates a presentation that appears like the game is being run at a higher resolution with higher quality texture packs. This is really what 1440p gaming should look like. DLSS 4 also exceeded my expectations significantly when looking at edge stability for 1440p gaming. This is really where DLSS has fallen apart previously, and even at times it has been difficult to recommend DLSS 3 quality mode because of it. For example, here in Black Myth Wukong, DLSS 3 quality has noticeable stability issues reconstructing this relatively slow-moving character, which you usually don't see as much of using DLSS 3 quality at 4K.
Yeah, so that was far from perfect, and this is what I like about Tim from Hardware and Box, because I just feel he don't sort of favour anyone, he just gives you the truth.
But take a look at how the DLSS 4 performance mode at 1440p handles the same edge stability. It's much improved, and this is the performance mode we're talking about with a render resolution of just 720p. Similarly, in this Ratchet & Clank example, the DLSS 4 performance mode has noticeably better stability than DLSS 3 quality. Edges are less aliased in motion, and yeah, there are still some problems here and there, but it's quite a noticeable improvement in my opinion. This makes DLSS 4 performance look much closer to native TAA rendering, even beating it in some aspects.
Yeah, because DLSS 4 is definitely more sharper in image quality, whereas there's a lot more blur on
Compared to
DLSS
what we
3.
saw from DLSS 3.
And even in some games, TAA would look a bit blurry, but definitely I found in quite a few games that native TAA seemed to get worse. I don't know why that was.
Quality versus native. The improvement from DLSS 3 performance to DLSS 4 performance is astronomical, even larger than the improvement we saw at 4K, because the DLSS 4 performance mode at 1440p previously delivered disgusting image quality.
Meet the Shark
See, even Tim said it.
Flex Breeze Pro Mist. It's the powerful indoor-outdoor fan that transforms and mists.
Even in the
I mean, see, a lot of people were telling me DLSS 3 performance was looking great, and I didn't believe that. But I've seen it. So when I had the 4080, I was looking at games like Indiana Jones, and I didn't see it looking great at all. So I would literally go balanced because I saw too much instability in the image, and it was more blurry.
examples where we saw a less significant improvement to stability at 4K, DLSS 4 holds up really well at 1440p. Driving in Cyberpunk 2077 produces a more consistent.
I mean, to be fair, when I'm comparing FSR 4 and DLSS 4, before the FSR 4.0.1 update anyway, I think this edged it in edge stability, which is what he's talking about. And like, you probably remember me saying about that aliasing on Spider-Man 2, and I think it happened in Last of Us Part 2 as well. That it looked a bit too overly sharp, and then like on the actual telephone lines and just around the character, and when you're swinging about in Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man 2 was the worst case where you saw swinging about, and I think it's either, I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, they fixed it in the update. So the FSR 4.0.1, I didn't notice anything like that after that update, so that's fixed now, as far as I'm concerned. But I think that might edge it still a bit in terms of fine detail like the edge stability with the aliasing.
Image frame to frame, better texture quality, less blur, and it can do all of that using the performance mode. For gaming at 1440p, this is truly a transformative update in these areas. Ghosting at 1440p is pretty similar to what we observed at 4K. In some instances, DLSS 4 is better at handling ghosting than DLSS 3, such as in Cyberpunk 2077, where DLSS 4 reduces ghosting in the street lamps and the car's tailpipe. However, in other situations where ghosting is more severe, DLSS 4 tends to produce even worse ghosting than DLSS 3, like we're seeing in Forza Motorsport.
Yeah, so there's still ghosting on DLSS 4, so it is really good, but again, it's not. I'll never overhype. I'm not going to overhype it and say it's perfect, because FSR 4 isn't perfect, and neither is this. So that's the reality. But they're very, very good, both of them, DLSS 4 and FSR 4.
What I found interesting is that in these situations where DLSS 4 handles ghosting worse than DLSS 3, at 1440p it seems to be even worse again than at 4K. In this exact same Forza example at 4K,
and that's another thing. This is why at 1440p, at 4K it's brilliant performance, but at 1440p I wouldn't recommend going below quality at 1440p still, because on certain games you will see probably a bit. It will be worse image quality, like on the hair quality for me, which is a big thing because I'm big on that. Like in Rebirth, the hair quality got dramatically worse once even on quality for some reason on Rebirth, when at 1440p, and then when you went balanced performance, much worse. even on DLSS 4. And to be fair, with FSR 4 as well, it was pretty similar with the results when I started doing aggressive upscaling at 1440p. But then in other games, it can look alright, like Shadows, Assassin's Creed. So it's again, it's very at 1440p. It's very dependent on the game engine. But 4K generally performance, I'd say it's looking pretty good majority of the games on performance at 4K, because how upscaling works, it works best with more pixel data, and obviously at 4K you get more of that. It's rendering from higher resolutions underneath it, and then say obviously at 1440p you seem to be, and so it's basically the resolution you're playing at and the amount of data it processes. That's what makes the upscaling look better. So at 4K you're fine, but at 1440p it can be a bit dodgy depending on the game. So this is why I will not say, like some other people saying, I'll just use DLSS 4 performance, FSR 4 performance. I'll tell people the truth, and for me it depends at 1440p on what game it is.
I tended to find DLSS 4 was a little worse, but not substantially so. At 1440p, there are some situations throughout this run where DLSS 4 was much worse, including examples where the ghost trail goes from being one double image to multiple double images. With that said, across most examples I used in this video, ghosting is not a huge concern at 1440p using either version of DLSS. Disocclusion is also a similar situation to what we saw at 4K. There has been a regression in this area compared to DLSS 3, with DLSS 4 creating more artifacts around your character in third-person games. This was most noticeable in games like The Last of Us Part 1, when...
Yeah, so this is... See, what I said about FSR 4, that's better with disocclusion than DLSS 4. So you will see less sort of artifacts around, say, in certain games. It's not a massive issue, but that is something that FSR 4 seems to be better at. But so they're trading blows with each other. So I mean, DLSS 4 is very good. You sort of pick a nose in both of them really, because they are good, but they're not perfect. Like some of these people overhype the technology, but I'm happy with them. But I just don't like overhyping it.
When Joel's head moves, there's a bit more sizzling in the DLSS 4 image as disocclusion occurs, comparing DLSS 3 versus DLSS 4 at the quality mode. This is partly because the DLSS 3 image is blurrier overall, which better obscures these artifacts. In Black Myth Wukong, you'll also spot disocclusion artifacts for 1 or 2 frames after your character moves. The good news is that these artifacts aren't shown for very long, especially at higher frame rates, because just 1 or 2 frames is in the tens of milliseconds range. It's only really noticeable when there are large and consistent movements, like in the Last of Us example, where after a few tens of milliseconds, the old artifact is replaced with a new artifact. The bad news is that if you do spot this issue, it'll probably be worse in DLSS 4. I don't think this is the end of the world because, surprisingly, there isn't a huge difference in disocclusion between DLSS 4's quality and performance modes. Yes, the resolution of the disocclusion is a bit worse in the performance mode, but both have a similar type of artifact visible. I was thinking that maybe the performance mode would fall apart here, and yes, disocclusion is worse than DLSS 3's performance mode, but it's not a devastating impact. At 4K, we found no significant difference in hair quality between DLSS 3 and DLSS 4. This is also true at 1440p, where generally the same quality mode is a match in aliasing and shimmering, so quality versus quality or performance versus performance. I wouldn't say the performance mode here is awful, but hair quality is noticeably better using higher modes, especially the quality mode or even better native rendering. Fine detail like hair can get a bit lost when upscaling, so hopefully this is an area that can improve.
Yeah, I mean, for me that is very game dependent again, because I go back to Rebirth. Hair quality does not look good unless you're doing native DLAA or FSR4 AA on that. So again, that depends on the game engine with hair quality, and obviously at 4K, hair quality gets worse the lower resolution you play at.
With future DLSS editions. Particle quality receives the same upgrades at 1440p as at 4K when using DLSS 4.
New Senstein Clinical Repair is absolutely the one I would use. It starts to work within 2 minutes from...
That is to say, particle ghosting is reduced significantly at the same quality mode, as you can see from this Last of Us example. 1440p upscaling really doesn't look great using versus performance.
If we're going back to that, I 100% noticed a difference in Monster Hunter Worlds because I've done a test where that looked, and so FSR 4 and DLSS 4 hair quality looked much better, even at performance on when I compared it to DLSS 3 quality. I think it was either DLSS 4, but either way, it was either DLSS 4 performance or. But either way, DLSS 4 was much better with hair quality. I think it might have been quality mode. I'll have to have a look back, but definitely for me, will see a difference in the hair quality for DLSS 4 over DLSS 3 because that seems to be the case in Monster Hunter Worlds, so it will be the case in other games. So it depends on what game you're testing for this. But I remember looking at DLSS 3 quality and at 1440p, so I was using the quality mode, and it was all it was a bit grainy, instability, and as soon as I put the transformer model on, that cleared up straight away the hair, and the same on FSR 4.
Performance. Much less streaky, albeit with apparently fewer particles being resolved. I saw similar ghosting reductions in Starfield. The main difference to 4K is that while the resolution of particles does decrease at lower quality modes, I feel the performance is a bit too low here for resolving particle detail properly, even using DLSS 4. The quality of fast-moving particles is a bit pixelated and grainy using the performance mode, so ideally I wouldn't want to drop below balanced for this type of effect.
For me, I don't drop below quality because I don't trust balance even. But again, as I said, at 1440p, it's a bit of a mixed bag in some games where I wouldn't go below quality. Transparency.
This would be stationary performance versus performance and so on. This is similar to what we saw at 4K, but quality, performance versus performance and so on. This is similar to what we saw at 4K, but I believe at 1440p there are even fewer edge cases where a lower DLSS 4 mode can match a higher DLSS 3 mode. The only exception to this would be stationary transparencies, which are more detailed with DLSS 4. The issue with 1440p upscaling of transparencies is those lower modes can really expose the low render resolution compared to at 4K. The bounce mode is usually okay, but some edge cases are less than ideal. The performance mode really struggles to keep some types of transparencies stable. In this respect, there can be...
So, stability will be an issue on both FSR 4 and DLSS 4 at the performance mode in some games. Because I think I've noticed that in Outlaws where it gets better with FSR 4, but it's still not perfect. So, they're very similar, I think, with definitely that edged it before that update. I think it still might edge it slightly at DLSS 4 with aliasing, but there's hardly anything in it.
Very little difference to DLSS 3 performance mode upscaling at 1440p. So for these sorts of effects, I wouldn't drop below balanced. When it comes to fine detail reconstruction, DLSS at 1440p is a bit less effective than at 4K. At the higher resolution, I tended to find that DLSS 4 balanced was a match for DLSS 3 quality, and that can be true at 1440p as well, for example with this spire in Cyberpunk 2077 in motion. But it was more common to see a similar mode required for similar quality, such as with overhead power lines like in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Here,
this is what I noticed, but I remember the map on Indiana Jones, and
I would say DLSS 4 quality
I didn't like it on DLSS 3 performance.
Is slightly better than DLSS 3 quality, so it is an upgrade if you're using the same mode, but if we drop DLSS 4 down to balanced, it's not quite as good as DLSS 3 quality. So I guess you could say there's about half a tier of quality improvement in this particular area. The other thing to be aware of is that there can be quite a bit of aliasing in these sorts of elements when using the DLSS 4 performance mode. While the performance mode is a huge upgrade in other areas of stability, these fine pixel level lines, details and wires can often be aliased to the point they are distracting, which
that looks pretty bad, that, to me.
Which is pretty typical for DLSS 3 as well. For my personal preferences, the minimum level I'd be satisfied with in a game is the balanced mode, which still has some...
That's like I remember it before, to be honest. So it doesn't look like it's changed much.
Aliasing, though it's usually not as severe.
It's now free to sell on eBay. eBay, things people love.
Bird's Eye Crispy Chips. So tasty! They're worth making a meal of.
The quality of tree upscaling in DLSS 4 at 1440p is better than what we saw from DLSS 4 at 4K relative to DLSS 3. At this resolution, DLSS 3 actually has quite a few issues properly rendering trees in motion, often leading to lots of sizzling and aliasing on leaves and branches.
That's definitely a lot sharper now, DLSS 4 over that. It just seems to be really blurry for me.
In addition, there was usually a
DLSS.
loss of detail associated with TAA blur. What this means is that for slower and more consistent motion, DLSS 4 performance at 1440p is actually capable of outperforming DLSS 3 quality, like you've been seeing.
You definitely, in this game, you're seeing more detail, just not as blurry. So it's so blurry there that you can't see as much of the detail compared to this.
In The Last of Us. In fact, in Indiana Jones, the level of stability and foliage quality on the trees is better in the DLSS 4 performance mode than using native 1440p rendering.
Well, for me, they've probably done it on purpose, if I'm being honest, because I remember in Cyberpunk, Gamer Nexus said that Cyberpunk had a very poor implementation of TAA, even at native, and this looks to be the same thing. So I don't know if they've done that on purpose, but native should be looking better than that.
Either using TAA or DLSS 3 DLAA. That's a very impressive outcome that really cleans up one of the pain points to upscaling at 1440p. For faster motion like we see in Star Wars Outlaws with trees blowing in the wind, here it's trickier for DLSS 4 performance to match DLSS 3 quality. Like we saw at 4K, this is more of a like-for-like match between quality modes. In Black Myth Wukong, I tended to find in this tricky example that DLSS 4 balanced was close to DLSS 3 quality, and to be on the safe side, that's usually the matchup I'd say is typical for DLSS 4, though it varies a lot between games. And when comparing the performance modes, it's a night and day improvement. DLSS 3 performance looks very bad, and while DLSS 4 performance isn't amazing, the image flickers less, it's less aliased, and it isn't as garbage in motion.
Well, this is why I say, because once you start telling everyone, oh, you should use DLSS 4 performance, and people will take that, literally take it at face value, and start thinking that's going to be the case in every game, whereas I don't say that. I say it depends on the game. It depends on the game engine. Because I do remember Black Myth not looking great on performance, and with DLSS 3, and it doesn't look much better on there at 1440p.
4 performance.
So it's going to depend. I mean, at 4K, you'll be right, I think, if you're using, as long as you're not using FSR 3 or DLSS 3. I think you'll be fine at 4K using DLSS 4 performance and FSR 4 performance.
Games. And when comparing the slower resolution, as I found fewer situations where DLSS 4 performance could match DLSS 3 quality. It is possible, especially when motion is slower. And
so it's a resolution, that's why, because 1440p, as I said, these upscalers are very good, but they're not magic.
Is more stable and better able to resolve patterns than DLSS 3 quality, like in The Last of Us, but there are other examples like this one in Cyberpunk 2077, where DLSS 4 was not able to clean up the moire patterns seen in DLSS 3. DLSS 4 passed this test at 4K with flying colours, not so at 1440p. For finer mesh detail, like here in Cyberpunk, I tended to find that DLSS 4 balanced and DLSS 3 quality looked similar, though neither is as good as native rendering for this type of element. The biggest uplift was comparing the performance modes, where DLSS 3 looks disgusting and DLSS 4 looks okay. Though like with some of the previous tests, I don't think the performance mode is quite good enough at upscaling fences to be usable at 1440p. At least...
Yeah, well, people were telling me DLSS 3 performance was great, so... Anyway, we'll move on to FSR 4 now. So, we'll have a look at that.
Checked the guidelines, and I think it's okay, even if it has the potential to scorch your... While I thought I would have to censor the FSR 3.1 image because YouTube doesn't allow offensive...
Well, we obviously know how bad FSR 3 is, so we'll skip that. Right, so I think this is a... getting to where we're
As
comparing.
world leaders in robotic
We kept looking at DLSS 4 and FSR 4 now.
boundary wire-free technology so smart, you'll be convinced it's magic. Get it right with Husqvarna robotic mowers.
There's so much blockbuster entertainment
These
on
bloody
Paramount
adverts on
Plus, it's unskippable. Nope. There's gangsters, gladiators. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but stream a mountain of entertainment from $4.99 a month on Paramount Plus.
Relatively low. The real challenge is the comparison to the industry leader in upscaling. So for the rest of this video, you'll see mostly FSR4 versus DLSS comparisons. So how do those technologies compare for blur and texture quality? FSR4 actually holds up really well in this regard. Previously we discovered that DLSS4 had practically eliminated TAA blur in motion, and this applied right down to the performance mode at 1440p. This meant the texture quality was enhanced and the overall image looked sharper relative to DLSS3 and even native rendering. This is also the case.
So this was on the FSR 4.0.0 update, and from what I've seen, the FSR 4.0.1 is better with edge stability. So
With FSR4 versus DLSS3 when using the same modes.
So if you're looking at these fences here, basically you will see an improvement on FSR4 with that, because it just looks a bit too overly sharp when you're looking at it. So in Spider-Man you would see it sort of run a bit that Alison would be a bit more unstable, but the latest version of FSR4 actually fixes that.
This applied right down to the performance mode at 1440p. This meant the texture quality was enhanced and the overall image looked sharper relative to DLSS3 and even native rendering. This is also the case with FSR4 versus DLSS3 when using the same modes, so in this case quality versus quality. In this Spider-Man 2 example, we're rapidly flicking between a still shot while stationary and a still shot captured mid-motion. The DLSS 4 version preserves basically the same level of detail and sharpness whether you're standing still or moving. DLSS 3 is quite blurry in motion when compared to the stationary image, and FSR 4 sits somewhere between the two, with much better clarity in motion than DLSS 3, but not quite approaching the level of DLSS 4. This was also the case in other games we explored, though it can vary depending on the title and scene. For example, in Hunt Showdown, FSR4 was much closer to DLSS 3 than DLSS 4 in terms of clarity, but in The Last of Us Part 1, the reverse was true and FSR4 was much closer to DLSS 4. In all of these examples, in-game sharpness was set to 0, so no additional sharpening is being done.
Yeah, so that is clearly a lot more blurry when you compare it to FSR4. There's more detail there all over his shirt. Just looks more sharper. There is a bit more finer detail on DLSS4 here. But again, this technology is going to just keep on getting better and better. So for me, it's not. This is zooming in as well, so you're not really going to notice it when you're playing the game.
Done after the upscale pass. And it doesn't really look like FSR4 is sharpening a blurry image either. It looks like genuinely better handling of fine texture detail in motion. There are just some aspects to the DLSS 3 image that you can't sharpen to make it look like FSR4, so that actually gives the edge to AMD's upscaler. This is very welcome news, as the crispness of the image is a major selling point to DLSS 4, and in a lot of examples, FSR4 is competitive in this aspect. How each of these upscales performs at the various quality settings doesn't change too much, so the clarity of the quality mode and clarity of the performance mode is similar. This can create situations where DLSS 4 performance mode is sharper and better than FSR 4 quality mode, though that's not necessarily true for other aspects to image quality. There were also situations where it's quite hard to tell which upscaler is providing better clarity unless you zoom in, so that's a huge result for FSR 4, as I pretty much always preferred its sharpness to DLSS.
I mean, for me, it's so damn close for detail. For me, the main thing was the edge stability, what he's talking about. So, just it was mostly in the Spider-Man 2, and he's saying it's the same in Ratchet and Clank, where basically just the aliasing is a bit. There's less stability with the aliasing, so it's a bit too sharp around the edges of a character or something like that. but I did notice a big difference after that update. The
It's 3.
FSR 4.0.1 update.
Incredible.
Oh, the adverts, how many of those do?
That's loud, darling.
Feel something extraordinary with new.
Yeah, but I mean, for it to be this damn close to DLSS 4 already, I mean, you literally, you're so close, it's not even worth worrying about for me.
You might have noticed in some of the previous shots that FSR4 can suffer a bit when it comes to the stability of edges in motion, particularly with characters. However,
Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about. That's one thing I noticed, which was a bit of a weakness, but that is definitely good that, because you're probably going to get the FSR 4.0.2 update, which will make it even better in something else. So it's definitely, for immature technology, FSR 4 is really good. You expect that to be really good anyway, DLSS 4. So it's definitely, it murders DLSS 3, FSR 4 for me.
this was a phenomenon that I only really saw in the 2 Insomniac games I used for testing, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and Marvel's Spider-Man 2, both of which use the same game engine. For some reason, in these specific games, FSR4 is more prone to aliased character edges compared to DLSS 4 and DLSS 3, and this looks kinda ugly in some respects. However, when flicking over to similar third-person titles in Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered and The Last of Us Part 1, I didn't see this aliased edge issue, and the stability of character edges in motion was fine. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I guess in a worst case scenario, FSR4 isn't able to preserve as much edge stability in motion as DLSS 3. Outside of these...
Yeah, I think that was just an Insomniac issue, because I only noticed it in Spider-Man 2 was actually the only game I noticed it in. I don't remember seeing it in Ratchet. I had a little go of it, but so maybe because this was 2 months ago, as I said. So for me, that is fixed now. The edge stability. Maybe DLSS 4 slightly edges it still, but I don't know. I'd have to literally have a look at it. But for me, they're so similar that it's not something people are going to notice. Unless you like zoom in, and you probably will see like some slightly like the detail, like you saw on Joe's shirt. What video was it? I'm not sure, but when he zoomed in on the shirt of Joe, it'll be a slight difference where it's just slightly more detailed, the OSS 4, but then it looks good enough on FSR 4. So it's literally gonna be a slight edge to DLSS 4, and then edge stability. I think he said disocclusion was worse on DLSS 4 and more ghosting, but for me they're so damn close, and this is what I've been saying, that it's going to be game dependent as well.
Cases, it's a mixed bag for FSR4. While a huge step forward compared to FSR3, I tended to find FSR4 was in the best examples only a match for DLSS3 in stability, with DLSS4 far ahead in its preservation of stable edges and details between frames. For example, in Ratchet & Clank, both technologies did a similar job of maintaining these stairs as we approach them, and similar in Spider-Man 2. In Hunt Showdown, the level of aliasing and shimmering was pretty similar, looking at FSR4 quality compared to DLSS3 quality, again with DLSS4 being clearly superior. In other situations, I don't think FSR4 is as stable as DLSS3 when matching up the same quality settings. For example, in The Last of Us Part 1, FSR4 really struggled in some of these slow pan shots, often creating instabilities on the bricks and window edges, which just aren't present in the DLSS3 image and can be a bit distracting. But what's even more strange is that in The Last of Us, I actually found FSR4 balanced to outperform DLSS3 balanced, with little difference in stability between the two FSR4 modes. In fact, at times I actually thought FSR4 balanced was more stable than FSR4 quality. So
yeah, I remember seeing that in Last of Us Part 1 because I tested it, and I believe there was a slight issue with quality mode in certain games. So I think that's why, because balance should be better than quality. So as far as I know, FSR 4.0.1 has actually fixed that, and the edge stability So again, you're going to have teething problems with technology at the start.
So, not sure how that works. FSR4 winning in a balanced versus balanced battle was actually quite common, so at most FSR4 is half or even less than half a quality tier behind DLSS 3. The problem that AMD faces is that the DLSS 4 performance mode is often more stable than the DLSS 3 quality mode, so it also holds true that DLSS 4 performance is more stable than FSR 4 quality. It's possible here that AMD preferred eliminating blur instead of targeting stability because FSR 4 is usually the sharper, less stable image compared to DLSS 3, while with DLSS 4 you get the best of both worlds. But this is the biggest area that AMD need to work.
I think that's because it blurs a lot out DLSS 3, so it looks more stable because it's so blurry.
On when improving FSR 4 in future versions.
So that's just a bit of fine tuning, really, what he's talking about.
When it comes to ghosting, all upscalers are prone to ghosting in the worst examples. Luckily, across most of the examples I saw, FSR 4 is not especially prone to ghosting and is unlikely to present ghosting in areas where DLSS doesn't. Most of the time, it's trading blows. So for example, when looking at these particles in Ratchet and Clank, there is a small amount of ghosting in the DLSS 3 and FSR 4 images, just at different times, though DLSS 4 is relatively resilient in this example. Here's another example looking at Spider-Man 2, and the exact scenario that triggers ghosting is different in the three algorithms, but no technique is immune. Unfortunately, I can't put FSR 4 through the Forza Motorsport test, as FSR 4 is not supported in that title, but again, across those that I did test, FSR 4 is pretty unlikely to cause major ghosting issues. A huge win for FSR 4 comes when looking at disocclusion. Out of the three main techniques being examined here, I think generally FSR 4 provides the best image quality, or at the very least matches DLSS 3, which was the previous leader. As we found in the DLSS 4 examination, to achieve a sharper image, DLSS 4 typically produces worse disocclusion than DLSS 3, with more sizzling around characters in third-person games. In titles such as The Last of Us Part 1, this is also true when comparing DLSS 4 to FSR 4. AMD's technology comes out ahead with less noticeable artifacts at the same quality mode. It's harder to tell in games like Horizon Zero Dawn, but when looking closely there's a bit less of that fizz around Aloy when running in the FSR 4 images compared to DLSS 3 and especially DLSS 4. In Hunt Showdown I noticed that the DLSS 4 image is a bit smeared around the gun in motion, while FSR 4 is relatively clean with only a few disocclusion artifacts, and DLSS 3 is pretty close to FSR 4.
You're restoring my access to the HR portal, right? Compliance reports due and I need that access ASAP. Nope.
In many situations, I don't think disocclusion artifacts are especially noticeable when using DLSS 4, as these artifacts typically disappear within a few frames, so in real-time gaming they can be hard to spot. But what's most impressive here is AMD essentially went from the worst upscaler for disocclusion with frequent sizzling around characters to the best implementation at 1440p. Hair quality is very similar between all three upscalers. When comparing using the quality mode, I didn't find many substantial differences in motion, especially in tricky scenarios such as Aloy's hair billowing as she runs forward.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with hair quality on FSR 4.
The detail, stability and clarity of the hair is virtually identical between FSR 4 and DLSS, so no more ugly grain in hair like we saw constantly using FSR 3.
Yeah, because that is one thing I really couldn't take, hair quality on FSR 3. Even at 4K.
This element is actually being upscaled relatively well now. This applies to various different games, including fur in Ratchet and Clank. The only major difference here is the edge of the fur, which is aliased using FSR 4, though I still think this is related to the other aliasing issues with Insomniac games that I was talking about previously. Again,
yeah, because that's basically when you see him, you're going to see that. So I did notice in Spider-Man, as I said, but I do believe that he's fixed. I'd have to have a look at it. But definitely it was fixed on Spider-Man 2. Because I was swinging about in the city and I remember just buildings, the edge stability of the buildings looked a bit overly sharp. And you did notice it in fast motion. But as I said, once that update come around for Adrenaline, it fixed it all. So the latest version of FSR 4 fixes that.
And this sort of artifact isn't seen in a title like The Last of Us, and speaking of The Last of Us, it was good to confirm decent beard stability, as well as actually slightly better hair rendering in this one example when comparing FSR 4 to DLSS. It's also not a situation where
Yeah, I do remember that being really good on The Last of Us Part 2.
DLSS can outperform FSR at lower quality settings. I lowered DLSS to balanced while maintaining the quality mode for FSR and found that FSR typically looks slightly better in that sort of matchup, so a strong result for AMD's upscaler in this area. For particle quality, there are mixed results to report. When looking at the confetti and Ratchet & Clank, there's a pretty significant difference in the way FSR 4 renders it compared to DLSS 3 and 4. With FSR, the confetti is much sharper and clearer, but this exposes the aliased edges a bit, which you don't get as much of in the softer DLSS presentation. As a result, the confetti can flicker a bit in the unzoomed image, whereas the DLSS 4 image in particular can flicker a bit as much of in the softer
I mean, I'd prefer a clear image myself, so it's going to be subjective, but that looks a bit blurry. Well, that definitely looks blurry. And that is better than that, but that's interesting. So that maybe the AMD was sort of finally sure that in the FSR 4.0.0 they were trying to make it so clear that it's made it a bit overly sharp around the edges in certain instances, and now they finally tuned it in the latest update.
DLSS presentation. As a result, the confetti can flicker a bit in the unzoomed image, whereas the DLSS 4 image in particular is a lot smoother. However, you'll see noticeably less ghosting in this area of the FSR 4 presentation than DLSS 3, so in some ways FSR 4 is the superior upscaler to...
See, this is why there seems to be more of a ghosting issue on DLSS, because they seem to add more blur. It's definitely on DLSS 3. That was looking overly sharp in like The Last of Us Part 2 on Joe's beard. That was I think it was a DLSS 3 that looked overly sharp. So that exposed that. I don't know what they were trying to do in that game really. But it does seem to be that DLSS will be more blurry than FSR 4. So that's interesting.
DLSS 3. With that said, overall, DLSS 4 looks like the best here, with FSR 4 quality only really being similar to, say, DLSS 4 performance. I saw a different experience in The Last of Us viewing the dense spore clouds in this area. I think FSR 4 looks really good here, especially compared to DLSS 3, which is strongly affected by ghosting. Compared to DLSS 4, FSR actually appears to be reconstructing more spore particles, though the DLSS image is superior in how it handles minor ghosting and shimmering. Still, based on these two examples, I believe FSR 4 particle quality...
Oh, that's interesting. That's rendering more. Huh. So, none of these upscalers at the top end are going to be perfect. It looks like they're going to be better at other things, so it's really not... I don't know if you can really say one's better than the other, although I'd say it's so close it's not even worth talking about for me. And I did say there's not really much between FSR 4 and DLSS 4, to be honest. They're both really good, so it's not something you can notice when you're playing the game too much. I mean, for me it was visibly obvious that FSR 3 was bad. I'm not seeing that at all with FSR 4 or DLSS 4, but I was seeing it with DLSS 3. There was quite a few games where I didn't like it, and obviously FSR 3 was even worse.
Should be better than DLSS 3 in most scenarios and potentially up near DLSS 4.
Skip the challenge and unlock funding immediately with the new Funding Traders instant funded accounts. No profit targets, no evaluations, just direct access to trading capital.
Anyway, I think
it's like 1440p.
Oh, was it restart me all the way? Yeah. Anyway, I think we're gonna just watch a bit more, and then I'll end the video, and then just give my final thoughts.
The fact we're seeing a similar or better experience than DLSS 3 is quite good. For mesh style fences with thinner details,
transparency,
with DLSS 4 perhaps having a slight edge. Not 4 transparencies are much clearer, more stable in motion, have better detail, and simply don't look like complete crap. In fact, I would say FSR 4 is on the level of DLSS 3 and 4, with DLSS 4 perhaps having a slight edge. Not only are transparencies reasonable while standing still, they often weren't with FSR 3, but fire also benefits significantly from superior reconstruction. You are much less likely to see grainy, pixelated fire in FSR 4, resulting in quality similar to DLSS. In Ratchet & Clank, the rotating hologram is clearer and better resolves detail, though DLSS 4 is a bit less aliased for some of the fine lines. The transparent logo on top of the store character looks like any other element in the game now. This also helps with situations where characters or objects become transparent as you move around the game world. For example, in Spider-Man 2, here I've turned around the camera close to a wall, which makes Spidey transparent for a brief moment. This transparency looks very similar between DLSS and FSR 4. Again, slightly better edges on the DLSS 4 image, but FSR 4 is quite good. I'll show what FSR 3 looks like when making this move, just so you can see how much of an improvement I'm talking about. And this is the where at 1440p, FSR 4 is again the least stable presentation out of the various options tested here, while DLSS 4 is much more stable in comparison.
Once again, I keep saying it, but this is the older version of FSR 4, and I believe this sort of thing is that he's talking about aliasing on like telephone lines and stuff like that, where it's just more unstable compared to DLSS 4.
This tends to be most noticeable on very fine pixel or near pixel level wires, where FSR 4 can become aliased in motion relative to DLSS. While the DLSS 3 image is certainly blurrier, it does maintain stability better. However, I wouldn't say FSR 4 is far behind, and especially in examples like Hunt Showdown, both DLSS 3 and FSR 4 can have similar stability to 3, but still isn't quite as stable or artifact free as you'll see from the DLSS 4 image. The fact we're seeing a similar or better experience than DLSS 3 is quite good. For mesh style fences with...
Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. So, I think, given that was an older version of FSR 4, and a lot of that stuff with edge stability I found to be fixed, especially in that. I mean, that was the only game where I noticed it, to be honest, where it was glaringly obvious that it was running when you're in a city with Spider-Man and you're moving about very fast in motion. You just saw the buildings sort of not shimmer, but the edge of the windows and stuff like that, it would look a bit overly sharp and run a bit. So it would just look a bit slightly unstable every now and then. And same with the fences. But it looks like AMD have finally tuned that. So it was just basically something, because it's immature technology. Overall, definitely the latest version is better than that. I mean, it looked like pretty much... I remember testing Spider-Man 2, having a look at DLSS 4 and FSR 4, and it pretty much looked like a tyre when I looked at it again. You can look back at my videos when I'm talking about that. So overall, it's very positive that FSR 4 is this good already. That's what I'd say about it. I mean, it's so very close that I'd say DLSS 4 might have... It probably does have the edge in terms of maybe image stability still. But, I mean, it's not really a massive win at all. It's just it's a slight edge there. Maybe texture detail is a bit better on the DLSS 4, but it's very ever so slight, because it's so... I mean, from what I've seen, it might be game dependent, to be honest, from what I've seen. So I've seen FSR 4 looking really good in certain games, and I'm hardly able to tell the difference, if I'm being honest. So for me, it's all pick a nose. I think they're going to end up being better at different things, to be honest. I think FSR 4 will have its own strengths. Like Tim said, it's better at disocclusion. So it's going to be stuff like that. I mean, because as I said, DLSS 4 isn't perfect. The main reason I thought I'd make this video is to show that they're not perfect, either one of them. They're going to have weaknesses, especially at lower resolutions. You're going to see the worst case of them. That's what I say. Do not go into games thinking DLSS 4 performance or FSR 4 performance will be great. This is why I've always said that the lowest I would go really is quality, but then I'd look at the game. Like Assassin's Creed Shadows performance looked really good even at 1440p on both DLSS 4 and FSR 4. So it's going to be depending on the game at 1440p, but on that I would say lowest, try native. If you can't run that, let's go quality, because hair will break up. The same for your Yakuza, really. I mean, I think I'd say quality on that, or native. So that's going to depend on the game. A lot of these people will tell you DLSS 4 performance is great. Just use that over quality, but I don't believe that, because I'm certain that you shouldn't be doing that. So it's just a video really to say, give my thoughts on it, and I do really rate Tim from Hardware Unbox. I pretty much agree with everything he says most of the time. I think he's really good at picking out all the small details in these upscaling techniques. He was right, FSR 3 for me was disgusting, really horrible, disgusting performance. I'd never use performance on a FSR 3 or balance usually. But again, on the game, some games it would look alright, FSR 3. But definitely on games like Cyberpunk, it didn't. So it's a tale of that really. And I think, I mean, it's positive that we've got FSR 4 now and DLSS 4. See, I haven't made a video to hate on the technologies. I'm just pointing out, do not overhype technologies to the point of no return, where you sort of disappoint yourself when you go into a certain game and you put, say, DLSS 4 on, and you're thinking, oh, that don't look great. I don't see. I keep my expectations at the normal level, and I don't really listen to too many people. Once they start overhyping the technology too much, I stop listening to them. So for me, I've tried and give people the honest truth. So it's pretty much what we watched. That is the truth. That there's limitations. As good as they are, these upscalers, there's limitations of them. But the good thing is, you'd think Nvidia as well, they're going to keep improving DLSS 4, and AMD have already improved it in the latest update. So I'm looking forward to seeing what FSR 4 4.0.2 comes out with, because they seem to be doing it in every 2 to 3 updates of Adrenaline. Because I noticed on OptiScale it was 4.0.0 when I first got my 97 XT, and then it went to 4.1. So whatever the state of it is now, I mean, edge stability is improved with aliasing, which is something I noticed, and DLSS 4 for me was better in Spider-Man 2 because of that in the end. But now it's literally been fixed, so it's matching it. So I'd say, if I had to say what's better at the moment, slightly, DLSS 4 is slightly better, ever so slightly, but it's not enough to worry about at all. If going by that, I mean, Tim wouldn't lie. And I have noticed quite a few of the same things, to be honest. But obviously, you can't expect too much of an immature technology, straight away. So it is what it is at the end of the day. So, I mean, for it to be already better than the DLSS 3, which was everyone was waxing lyrical about, I think that's really good. So again, it's just a bit of a reality check for the people that think it's like, they upscaling is really good, but it's not to the point where you can just flick it on at any resolution and think, yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, at 1080p, it's definitely better than it was, but I still would think, I wouldn't want to play at 1080p myself, and I wouldn't want to use upscaling. The last I would go is quality 1440p. I'd even turn down the ray tracing before I start sort of upscaling any further down at 1440p. So I think that would be my advice at 1440p. 4K you're fine. You can use performance, balanced, quality. That is my honest truth on that. So you can totally trust me on that. At 4K you're fine. I think performance mode was basically made for 4K. It can be, it's going to depend on the game at 1440p. I mean, Black Myth, it didn't look good. So yeah. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.